This morning I'm talking about the crises of spiritual growth. I don't know of anyone that has not experienced a crisis in their life, in their personal life, their family life, even the business that they work for, the country they live in, or planetary crises. So keeping this fact in mind, it would seem that crisis is a part of life itself, right? We just have to understand it and how to use it to our advantage to help us grow. So in the normal course of life, we can all expect to experience crises. The teaching, let me explain. First of all, I didn't want to take today's talk into any emotional experience of crises, but to lift us out of the obvious emotional elements that crises play, in our lives, but to help us understand through the teaching what the teaching has to say about the crises of growth. And in this case, every crisis is an opportunity to grow spiritually. So today what I'm sharing with you is the subject of crises according to the teaching. And the teaching explains that there are three main types of crises. Three main types. First is the crisis of individualization. So that's you, that's me, that each crisis that we experience can be seen as an opportunity to become more of an individual. The second is the crisis of reorientation, which is natural to follow the crisis of individualization. We have our personal crises and then we adjust to the effects of that crisis, and that's the crises of reorientation. And then we have the crises of initiation. So those are the three crises. The crises of individualization, which is really personal, at a personality level, that the crisis is presenting to you. The next crisis then is how you're going to adapt and adjust to the effects and how you handled the crises of individualization, and then how those two crises work toward your ultimate experience, the ultimate experience of initiation. So the crisis of individualization is related to all efforts that we make to know ourselves and to be ourselves. So this means when we go through a personal crisis, the opportunity, if we understand it and can put ourselves, immerse ourselves wholeheartedly into that crisis, we begin to know who we are and who we are not. We learn more about ourselves through crises than through success, interestingly enough. So the crisis of individualization is a battle between those forces that prevent us from being ourselves. Now, the crisis of reorientation and initiation occurs when we successfully pass through 21 sub-crises of individualization. 21 sub-crises. So this tells us something. The teaching is giving us a clue that not every crisis is a crisis that leads to reorientation and initiation. It tells us, I believe, that these 21 sub-crises are directly related to the growth of our soul. The other crises can be the crises of humanity, in other words, a general crisis, not so focused on our own soul growth, but greater. This affects the masses. Or maybe the person we're married to, or one of our children and their children's children and family and grandchildren and so forth. They all may be going through a crisis, but it's not, that affects us, but it's not related to this 21 sub-crises of the crises of individualization. So, for example, the crisis of reorientation leads us into several sub-crises, such as the crisis of new values. The crisis of new values. The moment a person begins to orient themselves toward new values, what happens is that the old values emerge into your personality, and then a battle takes place. The old and the new. We're battling, trying to be the new, and the old doesn't want to let go. The crisis of unity is also one of the 21 sub-crises. People pass through unimaginable crises as they work toward achieving unity within themselves. This is what we call integration, when we're trying to integrate the physical, emotional, mental body, so each body functions as one whole unit. And the same happens when we move from the integration of the personality to alignment and fusion of the personality to the higher self. In both instances, we are undergoing one of those 21 sub-crises of individualization. And in this case, the sub-crises would be unity. Unity within ourselves. Our nature, our group, our nation is in a crisis where enemies will begin to assail them on all levels. Of course, there are positive crises, for it is now that the person is living within in the principles of beauty and freedom. Such crises improve our cooperation with our higher nature. And then the crisis of initiation, which is related to all major renunciations. So that's a key word. The crisis of initiation, which is related to all major renunciations. And these renunciations lead us to the expansion of consciousness. So the crisis of initiation refers to the first, listen to this, careful, because so many people get it wrong. The first crisis of initiation refers to the first major initiation, which is called the initiation of transfiguration. It's the third. But even though it's the third, it's not. It's the first. It's the first significant initiation that influences the soul and helps it to advance more rapidly on the path of evolution. So once we pass the first two major crises, the crises of individualization and the crises of reorientation, now we will be prepared to go through the crises of the first major initiation, which is leading us to transfiguration. So by successfully passing through these two major crises and their sub-crises, we can then enter into the first and second initiations. So the first and second initiations are called the initiations of the threshold. These initiations of the threshold are the initiations that prepare us for the first major initiation, the transfiguration initiation. Do you have it? No one's answering. Okay, I hear some laughter. Okay, it's a lot of words. The crisis of transfiguration marks a time when you gain freedom from that lower nature. The threefold personality. This threefold personality has been your authority for such a long time. You feel that for the first time that you are no longer controlled by your physical body, your emotions, and your mind, that you are something else, and that these three elements of your life no longer hold authority over you. At the Transfigure initiation, you meet your solar angel face to face. Your solar angel, your inner guide, is your source of inspiration. It becomes the source of your ideas. It becomes the source of your visions. In the third initiation, you make your first contact with what we call in the teaching your true direction. Your true direction. So the third initiation is very important to achieve for various reasons. First, a third degree initiate, which is the one who has taken the third initiation, which is the first major initiation. The third degree initiate is initiated into the real field of service. Second, they are enlightened about the plan and the purpose related to our planet. And thirdly, they are now ready to select their co-workers and the field in which they are going to work. It is with this initiation, the third, that you have your first, and let me say this respectfully, that you have your first little perception of the direction of your life. You sense that you're becoming in tune with that will aspect, the will of God, that true direction. It is during the third initiation, the light, the beam of intelligence descends into our brain, and we become aware in our brain consciousness of the plan. So because of this, now you, the third degree initiate, have a plan and firm direction. A lot has been written about the first major initiation, which you can find in the teaching. But I wanted to give a little insight into what you can expect. Let me give you a glimpse of the crises that are included in the crises of initiation, and I've written down just 9 of them. The first is the crises of the purity of your threefold personality. Next is the crises of readiness and skill and knowledge and beingness. These are 9 crises that are included in the crises of initiation. Third, a little bit of the first, a little bit of the second, and then the pow, meaning it hits full force, meaning in the 2 initiations of the threshold, we have glimpses of these experiences, which for us are overwhelming. You know, if we're at that threshold of the first, or on the threshold of the second, and going through the sub-levels of each of these first 2 initiations of the threshold, they seem overwhelming to us. Sometimes we feel like we're a victim. How could these things happen to us? Well, those are just prelude experiences to that first major initiation. But the beautiful thing about this is that these preludes will be remembered in our soul, in our atomic structure. So when we are now prepared to take this first step toward this, into this third initiation, then the memory process calls forth those overwhelming experiences that we hopefully successfully passed, and will help us understand and spiritually realize the purpose of these crises for initiation. So we have the crises of purity, we have the crises of readiness, and the third is the crises of karmic payment. This is when you begin to pay your karma very, very rapidly. In the teachings we read about, at this point in our life, we live several lifetimes in one life, and that means, and why we take the rapid crises of karmic payment. The fourth is steadiness on the path despite conditions. Steadiness would include balance and equilibrium. Those would be two key words with this crisis: steadiness on the path despite conditions. The fifth is sensitivity to higher impression. It's this sensitivity that we've developed as we have taken these two, the first and second initiation of the threshold, that we now have refined ourselves to a point that we become sensitive to higher impression. Number 6 is accuracy in discernment. Number 7, trustfulness and dependability. Number 8, sacrificial service. And number 9, the crises of radiation. So you can meditate on these 9 crises as seed thoughts. Seed thoughts to illuminate your minds and understand them, and then to make your decisions as you go through the crises accordingly. So all of these crises are parts of our life. We are involved in them consciously or unconsciously, voluntarily or involuntarily, particularly, partially or wholly. The field of our battle is wherever we focus our consciousness. For the balance of today's talk, I will focus on the crises of growth, which is part of the crises of individualization. So, this is another one of these sub-crises, but it plays throughout all of those 21 sub-crises, which is the crises of growth. Are we growing? Growth in the process of individualization. When a person advances mentally and spiritually, they are going to encounter seeds of crises. That's just the way it is. It doesn't make you special. It doesn't make you a victim. It is just the process of advancing. During spiritual growth, you will attract a certain teaching and a certain teacher. Sometimes when you go through a crisis, you might think that the crisis is because of the teaching, because you are in the teaching. But actually, the teaching and the teacher are there to give us courage and wisdom to pass through the crises. Of course, the teaching intensifies the crises by strengthening the higher principles that are in you, and these principles that prepare you to go to battle. It is usually as a result of a personal crisis that a person enters the spiritual path, finds a teaching and a teacher who will give them the courage to pass through the crises. Crises may reveal how much we fight against ourselves while pretending that we are in conflict with another person. Now, this is going to take some thinking, concentration, thinking. Often, the other person plays back in their actions a tape that we have in our mind. We usually watch our tape in action as played by the other person. We condemn the other instead of condemning ourselves. It's all about them, not about ourselves. For example, someone does you wrong. This puts you in conflict with the many wrongs that you have done to others. This is all subjective. It's all buried in part of that subconscious mind. And then it becomes these tapes that are played back by ourselves and others. So instead of recognizing ourselves in the wrongdoings of that person, you intensify your own wrongdoings by your own previous actions, and thus condemn the other rather than yourself. So when you are fighting against yourself, you pretend you are in conflict with that person. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay. In reality, the action of the other person who wronged us triggers several related events in our subconscious, such as the tapes of hatred and jealousy, even anger. Interestingly, we can play the tape of another person, and that person controls us through the tape that they are playing through us. We can, however, stop playing the tape and halt the influence that the person has on us. Many times we complain and say, "My husband is acting in such an obnoxious way," when he is simply demonstrating those things within us and is the victim. As long as that victim is within us, as long as that tape is within us, we have the same trouble. Even if we divorce and choose another husband, he will replay whatever tape we have within us. The crises of individualization, the crises of growth. For example, if we are self-centered, he will play it back to show us how ugly it looks. So we will eliminate self-centeredness in ourselves. But we have to be awake, see. We do not want him to be self-centered, but we cannot help it because the tape within our system is self-centered. If we see our husband is self-centered and strongly react to it, we must look at ourselves with a serious and detached look and see, is this really me? Is he playing a tape of who I am? Am I self-centered? As we begin to change ourselves, our husbands will change. Our friends will change. Our families will change. Family crises, in other words, must be closely watched so the members will not play each other's tapes. This is the way of the spiritual path. It is the crises of growth. There are negatives as well as positive tapes recorded in us. Negative tapes have a greater chance, however, of being played than the positive ones. Nature wants us to see in others what we are doing within, and thereby change ourselves. About criticism, let's say every time someone negatively criticizes you, they create a crisis in you in which you are either becoming influenced by the image that they are impressing upon you, or you reject this image and think highly of yourself. See, they're criticizing you, right? And you're either going to react or respond. And if you respond, you're not attaching the image that they have created and trying to impress you with, but you're responding just the opposite, to recognize your beauty in a sincere way. For example, if someone says you are stupid, you must immediately think, this is not true. I have done many intelligent things. They only say this because they are upset or angry or jealous. So through this kind of thinking, you will not nourish the negative image that they are trying to impose upon you. Thus, during a personal crisis, you can protect yourself and use the crises to strengthen your faith in your divine essence. A person is precious because that person is part of the one absolute self. As a disciple, this is how you must begin to think about yourself. For example, you can think, all the wrong that I have committed can be washed away once I give myself to the path of striving for higher achievements. Your vision will come. This is the point. This is a critical point, a vision. A vision. This is not an idea. This is not something you're going to, make money off of. This is a vision that's going to come to you and raise you to the summit of the mountains. And you're going to forget your weaknesses and start thinking about how you can actualize that essential divinity that's living within you. People in crises sometimes want to know where and to whom they can go to get help. If you do not have a wise teacher to consult with, then we suggest that the next best thing to do is to strive toward your vision. As you expand your consciousness and work on yourself, now solutions will come to you. Something that is very interesting is this. As you expand your aura, this is the process now of, as you are going through reorientation and your consciousness is expanding and your aura is expanding, you begin to draw people to you that are involved in crises. Your aura will charge them with spiritual energy. It will calm them down and will give them the strength to solve their own problems so they can pass their moments of crises in creative ways. But you have to stay calm and serene when you're in their presence. Engaging in discussion is not necessary unless they draw you into it. I've had many experiences where when people come into my office to discuss their problems, or on Zoom these days, I'll redirect them to other things for a while, other ideas, other conversation. And during that time, the accumulated psychic energy, that energy exchange between myself and the other person, calms them down. Or between, let's say you're the one that's having a crisis and you're in the presence of one who has that expanded aura. And you go in, melting down, and before you know it, your consciousness has changed. That's because of the psychic energy that the one with the expanded aura has carried and is now affecting you. Pretty soon you forget your problems And when you leave, you say, thank you for your advice. Now I know what to do. Even if they did not talk directly about the crises. I used to have this experience with my teacher. People on every level advance through crises because crises make them renounce their limitations and strive toward higher unity. A crisis on lower planes often creates cleavages and tension. A crisis on higher planes help us to approach greater unity. As we proceed from unity, toward unity from plane to plane, we're going to face different crises. For example, we face individual and family crises on the physical plane. On the emotional plane, we face group and national crises. On the mental plane, we face global crises. On the spiritual plane, we face the crises of initiation. But the higher we go, the greater is our power to use these crises to advance our creativity. Only in such a state of progress can the human flame reach its highest expression. So on the path of our aspiration and progress, we must be careful to strive toward the step that's just immediately ahead, not toward a goal that is 3 miles or 20 miles ahead, but the one that's right in front of us. We must not run 2 miles because we're going to collapse. We must strive to conquer our immediate obstacles and destroy our limitations, and then proceed on a gradient scale without leaving any gaps behind us. So try to improve yourself step by step instead of trying to be a saint or a millionaire in a month. Those who force themselves beyond their abilities, beyond their karma, listen to this, they slow down their evolution. Those who force themselves beyond their abilities, beyond their karma, slow down their evolution more than do those who do not consciously choose to evolve. It's pretty powerful. Sometimes when crises occur, people begin to fight against their lower nature and have transgressions, thinking that their lower nature is responsible for the arrival of this crisis. They think crises can be resolved by defeating their lower nature and failures. But this is retro thinking, which is still practiced in many outmoded disciplines. The best way to fight the lower nature is to shift your consciousness from your weakness and failures toward your higher ideals and visions, and to work to actualize them. As you strive toward the highest, you raise yourself to a higher altitude from which you can then see more clearly the directions your weakness and failures took you. You can let them slowly dry out and disappear due to a lack of nourishment. So in conclusion, remember how many crises you have passed through to reach your current age. Actually, our entire life is a series of crises, right? So, crises, if we could just change our attitude, our approach to understanding crises to a point where we recognize that crises are disciplines through which we grow and become mature human beings. Nature recycles us again and again until our divine essence emerges triumphant. So I hope this helps you as you're going through your crisis today and on ad infinitum, that we stop and remember today's talk. Thank you.